Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for being with us. I'm really looking forward to this exciting conversation on Beyond the Bid. For those of you who are not familiar with the Business Improvement District, it's a type of a public-private partnership that enables place to achieve its fullest potential, and my colleagues on the panel are doing some amazing work around the world. So I'm going to begin by inviting you perhaps to introduce yourselves and share a little bit about your background, what makes you tick, why do you do what you do, and why are you here? So maybe I'll begin with Rosanna and we'll go along the line.
Thanks, Anupam, and great to be here talking about experience. So I'm Rosanna Vitiello, I'm the founder of the Place Bureau, and I'm always fascinated by how we build better relationships with places, right? And that kind of sweet spot between the two. So we often use tools that focus on storytelling, on narrative, and on experience. And from my perspective, that's come from a background actually of designing destinations, visitor attractions, museum master planning, where we're always starting with narrative, like what's the story? And then thinking about how we can kind of weave that through space in terms of a series of moments, let's say, that help us make memories and make meaning, because ultimately placemaking is meaning making. Now, I think the interesting thing is when you take that and you expand it into public space, right, which is now the area that we're often working in, is that actually this becomes an experience that's owned by many different people. So you bring, in fact, a lot of our work now is about bringing lots of different people together, community members, stakeholders, master planners, people with lots of different points of view, to imagine what that future experience might be that they want to kind of enrich their lives. And so we're always working often with these things that people think are intangible, like story and narrative and experience, but we really try and develop that vision and shift it into some concepts and some ideas for placemaking that then start to move forward. And I think that's where actually Kate and Stephen come in.
Kate.
Nice segue.
Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be in this amazing city. My name's Kate, and I'm a director at Primera. And we describe ourselves as a place and people consultancy. And we're based in London, but we operate globally as well. And we work across a range of placemaking principles, but we probably have a particular specialism on developing what we like to call as investment partnerships. And in the UK, that takes the form of business improvement districts, which is essentially the legislative framework that provides the ability for us to galvanise communities and then, crucially, raise income. But going back to the sort of people part of this, I think is absolutely crucial, because what I think is most important in the work that we do and the work I've done over my career is understanding how crucial that sort of emotional connection, that engaging with all the different stakeholders and being able to identify, although you might have different constituents that make up a community, you will often find that there is always something that can unite them. And a lot of the time that comes down to the quality of the experience of being in a place that can be really, really human. That has brought me through all sorts of different roles. I've worked on major infrastructure projects such as the high-speed railway line in London and King's Cross and St Pancras. And now I'm obviously working in central London on business improvement districts. And throughout all of that experience, it's the people, the community, the experience that is at the heart of what I think makes a successful place. And I therefore find working through the business improvement district model is really rewarding, because you can actually deliver some of those sort of experiences and aspirations that those communities want to see achieved. So I'm delighted to be here to have this discussion.
Thank you. I'm going to come back and unpack a little bit of that. That's very interesting. But Stephen, over to you.
Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. We've been talking quite a bit about it the last couple of days. And my experience is I'm British, but I've been living in Denmark for the last 40 years. And I'm trained as an architect in the UK, and then I moved to Denmark. And working from private practice, and for nearly a decade, I was the chief city architect in Denmark's second city called Aarhus. And if you don't know this, a fun fact, Aarhus, the population Aarhus are the happiest people in the world at the moment. You didn't know this, did you? But look at me, I'm smiling, you know.
Doing something right.
And Aarhus is called the Smiling City.
Really nice.
So this is possibly one of the reasons. No, the thing is that I've been working with the public realm now during that period as city architect. And it's sort of become more and more onerous, the challenges we're facing about bringing people back into the city, the urban realm, and how to do that. And we developed some techniques which are kind of a framework from some thoughts around tactical design or strategic design, especially at the early phases of projects, where you can maybe do some prototyping and imagining the future. Yeah. And studying how to make place-making analysis and mapping and so on and so forth, and try and imagine the future. Mm-hmm. And I think this is where I think the real framework is also with bids, is it's bringing people together. And how do we do that? Make people feel comfortable in the urban realm.
Thank you. No, that's brilliant. I think thank you for reminding us where you come from, and we're very happy about that. So this is a happy place, Bilbao. We've been fortunate to learn a lot about the city and its transformation, and our particular, the symbol of transformation, the Guggenheim. We heard from the director that the transformation was an endogenous experiment. It was not like other cities which attract the Olympics or investment, but they really went deep into figuring out how to turn this place inside out. And I think that's perhaps a good cue to begin our conversation around how do you actually make transformation happen, because so many times it's about telling a new story about a place that's already existed for a while. How do you get people to actually believe and own that story, and then how do you communicate it to the outside world? I wonder if we're missing a trick by saying, actually, we need to spend some time in figuring out what should be a vision for a place, perhaps. And I just wanted to invite your thoughts, maybe with Kate this time, because you've been busy in a sense, you're operating a startup.
Yes.
So you are building a vision for a place that is very old, in fact, the City of London.
Yes.
So I wonder if you want to share a little bit about your experiences over the last couple of years.
Yes, thanks, Anupam. I mean, the business improvement district that I lead in the City of London is the Eastern City, and essentially it's the tall building cluster. So you'll all have heard of things like the Gherkin, the cheese grater, the walkie-talkie. They're all the big tall buildings. That whole area now is part of the Eastern City Business Improvement District. It's the most extraordinary commercial hub, about £11 billion in economic output each year, 60,000 workers. We raise, as a business improvement district, about £3.5 million a year, which makes us the largest occupier bid in the UK, which is largely because of the types of businesses that we have in that area, the sort of bigger FTSE 100 companies that all invest in the business improvement district. And as Anupam said, this is a place 2,000 years in the making, but from the Eastern City's point of view, it's really going through quite a substantial change. We've got 11 additional tall buildings that are either in planning or have already been approved. The City of London Corporation estimate that there's going to be an additional 1.2 million square metres of grade A office space provided over the next 10 years, and we know that about 85% of that is going to be in the Eastern City tall building cluster. And that is just a small part, really, of the square mile. So it's quite an incredible amount of development in a very small part of the city. And I think what the coalition that the bid is building is enabling us to do is looking at the opportunity that sort of growth provides, but also acknowledging some of the challenges. We're dealing with a mixture of these beautiful tall buildings, but also some more redundant office buildings. So there's a big question about what you do with those sort of lesser quality buildings, and so this transition towards the sort of more mixed use, so not just the office building, but more hotels, more leisure, more retail. There is also a challenge around some of the sort of the climate impacts, and just the physical nature of these buildings creating shade, wind tunnels. If anyone's been there, you can find yourself being blown down Leadenhall Street at times. And as a coalition of the businesses and the workers in that area, alongside our public sector partners, we're able to really look at how we as a group of people who are all invested in this part of the world, how we can work together to maximise the opportunities that arise from growth and the investment that comes with that. We have just published our first public realm vision. We talked about visioning being really key. And I think that what we're trying to do here is not just create a vision that sort of sits on a shelf like some other vision documents. You know, you think this idea, it's another vision, put it on the shelf, we'll come back to it later. What we're actually trying to do is set out some principles and ideas, some opportunities that are really rooted in insight and engagement and collaboration with our community. And we're already now thinking, right, how do we now start to test some of these, to then move some of these forward, to deliver them in the longer term? And I just want to give you a really quick example of something that, a similar process that happened elsewhere in London. So the North Bank Business Improvement District, which is the area that's at the top of the Strand, near Aldwych and Somerset House, if you're familiar with that part of London. That used to be a horrifically congested, polluted, gyratory road system. It was a real block for the students who were at King's and at LSE, actually being able to cross the road in that part of London. And so there was talk of trying to remove this gyratory. They talked about it for 30 years. Everyone said, no, it's too difficult. It'll never happen. The bid then put that scheme in their first public realm vision. And then soon after they published that, they invested in some modelling and some testing. It then built the business case that enabled Westminster City Council to then invest £22 million of public funding. And that space opened 2 years ago. It's now award-winning. If anyone's been there, the transformation is totally unbelievable. Yeah. And I think that idea of a vision and being able to sort of get stakeholders on the same page, which was the crucial bit that the bid was able to do, I think is absolutely vital.
Yeah, it sounds like you're almost creating vision in motion and time. It's very dynamic.
But you're also able to then invest.
Can I ask her a question?
Yeah.
I've been reading that COVID had an impact on the city. Is that still the effect? I mean, people who want to stay at home more, work from home more. Why are you still building so many square meters?
Great question.
It's a great question.
It's just...
So I think when COVID happened, I think everyone thought that's the end of the city, it's the end of the office.
Yeah.
I think it's not the end of the office at all, actually. I think people are just working in different ways.
Yep.
We are seeing a sort of gradual upward trajectory. So I think we're at about 2.7 days on average for people coming back into work in London. It's
2.7?
2.7. And it is going up.
How many hours is the 7.7?
So London City hours are long one, huh?
But what we're seeing, though, is that the office is still needed, and the office is, so obviously people still need those sort of great office spaces for those days they are in the office. I think what we are seeing, though, is that there is a flight to quality, so people want the really sort of top quality office spaces, which I mentioned earlier about some of these sort of lesser quality office spaces actually now, that whole, let's think about what we do with those sorts of spaces. Something happened, though, before COVID, though. The City of London Corporation launched a policy called Destination City. They recognised that they needed to diversify as a place. And that started pre-COVID. It has obviously been put more sharply into focus post-COVID. And I think what's happening now is that you're seeing a complete shift in the city. So it's still obviously a place of work. It will still be that sort of central business district, but it will be, I think, a much more diverse, inclusive, welcoming, vibrant place, because you're actually then injecting these alternative uses and welcoming different people into the space. And of course, that brings new business opportunities as well. So we're seeing different like leisure operators, retail, cultural uses, coming into the central business district that was not there previously. So I think COVID, yes, has changed things, but you will always still need these great office spaces, these great places, to derive the agglomeration benefits. But I think what you'll end up with is a much richer, more
So Rosanna, I'm going to turn to you and invite you to share a little bit about the language, because we are talking about office spaces and return to work, and things have of course changed. We see that all over the world. How are you seeing it in the places you're working in? And please feel free to offer a different provocation.
Well, there is a shift from productivity towards pleasure, right? And I think this is something that to me is really fascinating, is that during COVID, like nothing physically changed in the cities. It was simply a mindset shift. And being able to understand that kind of shift in mindset and anticipate it is really important. That's always the bottom line. Now, to me, some of the most successful placemakers and experienced designers are nightclub owners. So the first commission that we received at the Place Bureau was from a guy called Simeon Aldred, who runs the Printworks in London, which is one of the biggest clubs. And he said, I've got this brief on my desk from a developer, Lend-Lease, and they want a narrative for this site in Silvertown. I don't know what to do with it. But I do know how to think about people, and I know how to think about emotion and what connects them to place, how to kind of coordinate that. And so actually in that instance, what was interesting for us was we went in and we worked with Simeon and his team, GLA Rural Docs, which is a public sector, and Lend-Lease, private sector developer. And we were able to sort of embrace the experience of actually being in the place as a way to shape the vision. Because I think this is really important. Often, a vision will be shaped in a room like this, or in a white box. You can't feel it. No. And you need to be able to feel the future for people to kind of step into it and go, do we like it or not? Can we create that atmosphere in a way or not? So what we were able to do in that instance was take people to this site, which, just to give you a bit of context, it's right next to City Airport, has a body of water the size of Central Park, which in London is incredible, and was private, had been privatized for years and years. But in essence was an old series of flour mills. What it meant was that it piqued curiosity among people. It was an example of like what could happen in the city, defunct workplace, defunct flour mill, defunct productivity. And people were, by being able to take 80 to 100 people on site over 3 days, we ran 3 days of charrettes, one on place, one on people, and importantly, one on experience, to help people imagine what the future might be like and see what that sound like. What's the sound of the plane sound like? Can I touch the water? What was fascinating to me, for me, one of the most powerful things was bringing in somebody like the team from Swimden Crew. And Swimden Crew are focused on encouraging black swimmers to build a kind of culture around swimming, i.e. help Londoners think about how to reconnect with the water. The point is, it's about pleasure. And actually, I think what's happened now is that project has secured $5 billion in funding. Setting the vision in a quick way by using the power of the place has been really key. And what they're looking at is how to create a workplace that also embraces the fact you're by the water and you can bring pleasure and leisure into it. Ultimately, that's why all work and no play makes a city a dull place. And
we spend a lot of time thinking about multifunctionality.
Yeah.
So we did we trialled something with the London Festival of Architecture last year. We called it the Urban Playground, and it was designed so that workers could sit and have their lunch there, or could have an outdoor meeting. But then it actually was a children's play area as well. And so we then ran some family fun days. Because this idea about trying to attract families and children to come back into a place that they'd previously seen as not for them. And that was really, really successful. And we've now incorporated play and playable features. We don't talk about playgrounds, we talk about playable features in our public realm vision. Again, that sort of multifunctionality. So we might have something that's in front of Fenchurch Street Station that could be a sort of sculpture or could be something for workers to engage with, but actually then kids can come and climb all over it at the weekend. And that for us is a real shift, and we want to see more of that.
Stephen, can I ask you to perhaps share a little bit about the work that you're doing in Aarhus? Because I know you've been working at a town scale.
That's right.
Quite a lot.
Well, no, it's really interesting to hear the background, the stories coming through here. If I share a little bit about Aarhus, we're quite small, 360,000 people, the second largest city in Denmark. We're like the naughty little brother, compared with Copenhagen. And we had a very large area, back at the turn of the century, we had a very large container area which was becoming dormant because the ships were too big to come in. So we built a new harbour area for them. And 71% of all containers into Denmark come through our harbour. So this dormant harbour area, we had a big master plan competition, which we've been working to or adhering to for the last 25 years. But when you have a big area where there's nothing going on, what the hell do you do with it for that time where you're waiting to get going and so on? So these temporary installations or activities The developer, together with the council, we thought, well, perhaps we can put a friendly face on it. So they started making this beach bar festival during the summer months. And Aarhus is a university town with 55,000 students. It's quite a lot. And they start making volleyball courts, like 15 of them, and it just transformed the image of it just by that one move. It was quite an interesting turnaround. So every time a new site became available, the beach bar got moved to another site. And it moved 4 times whilst it was being built. Lately, during the last, we're roughly halfway through this harbour area now, and the latest project was built. We wanted to have more life in the area, so there was a building site ongoing right next to the Queen's Jewel, the harbour, the basin area there. And we said, what if, this is where we're sort of imagining and trying to be creative, what if we made the building site line, the fence, into a livable fence? And then you can make a promenade next to it. And we invited some people who have made a temporary business area in the old goods yard in Aarhus. They have a lot of success. We invited them in to help us design this and build it, using containers, and it was almost like a cowboy western site or film set. And there was all sorts of activities. And it was wonderful because this quirkiness which arose from this accidental approach meant that people like this quirkiness compared with all these polished, beautiful new buildings, which have very expensive properties. And big were the architects on the project for that area. We encouraged them to go and to talk these people who have been building these containers, and it completely altered their design. So we have small pavilions which are made of cork or thatch, or timber or glass and different materials, or burnt wood and what have you. And it's created a beautiful small scale area. And this is one of the things which is a big challenge for me doing these big projects, is the scaling. Yeah. And we talked about this yesterday, Rosetta and I, and it's one of the biggest challenges we're facing when we're talking about urban realm, the scale of things. So, for example, another project in the heart of Aarhus, next to the cathedral, it was car-dominated for many, many years, and it's been transformed and it's become cobbled to make it historical, you know, that sort of look of it. Sure. And there's still not much life going on there. And we have, every year there's a festival going on in Aarhus, and the director said, well, what would happen if we made that into a forest for 10 days? What would happen? I said, what if? It was wonderful, because the most fantastic thing for me was that it got all the politicians to talk about it in the city hall during the meetings. And the people were loving it. People were there all day. The kindergartens came in, there was no cars, it was playing in the areas. All the trees, by the way, afterwards, there was like 150 of them, were brought into the play schools around Aarhus. And it was there for 10 days. And it completely changed the mindset. Why don't we have more green in the city? And on the back of that, I managed to change a car parking area by planting trees around this square as a temporary project, as a kind of a prototype, to say, well, if we leave it like this for a few years, we'll see what impact it could have. And of course, the car lobbyists were livid, you know, as they always are. And this is one of the things where the prototyping and temporary actions can be helpful in nudging policy in a way that could, for example, removing cars for certain periods of time. You can strategically work with that, but you have to make designs which are very high quality. So they look as if they're there to be there, you know. And I think, being an architect, this is working with the landscape architects we employed. Luckily, we've got some very good ones in Aarhus, international names, and it transformed the space. And we're still working on new projects doing this type of approach. What if, and testing, causing a disturbance, but it's very, it's catalytic.
Yeah. Well, we're here in Bilbao, which is a fascinating city of transformation. I want to try and bring this together a little bit, because we are talking of different scales, places that people may have never visited, so it's a bit abstract.
Kate didn't get a chance to have a say.
Yes, of course, you may.
No, not Kate, so Rosanna.
Oh, no, I just want to add something to this, because I think what's fascinating about Kate's work and your ability to try something, show it works, to then have the public sector invest, and Stephen, your work, as you said, is to get people talking about something, is they're all helping to alleviate this fear. There's a lot of fear in working in public spaces and placemaking, right? And if you're thinking about how you build better relationships with people, being scared of them is a terrible place to start. So I think, Charles, I'll echo you here, because I love one of your earlier ideas of places that say yes and places that say no. That's an underpinning to me, so of all of this work. The idea of sort of taking micro risks together. So if you look at Esther Perel, the relationship therapist, right, who does a lot of work around trust, she says building trust is about taking micro risks, and that's what you guys have done.
That's right.
Which to me is fantastic. So that process is so important. So regardless of where you are in the world, the way we build relationships is similar, and I think that's very helpful for us, because we're dealing with lots of different types of people.
I think you're absolutely right. I think having that vision, though, at the beginning is the first stage, because what you want to do is get everyone on the sort of same page, not a granular level, but the sort of place we're all wanting to create. You know, so in the city, there's lots of, everyone's on the same page around diversifying the city, destination city, and I think once you've got a sort of coalition of the willing, essentially, that everyone's on board with that sort of big macro picture, then you can, as you say, start to take the micro risks that might help you then get there. And then I think also the other thing about the collaboration point is that it does unlock money. And I think we've all got to have the discussion about money when we're talking about transforming places, because the what if is brilliant, and I think it's amazing, as long as it's then alongside the sort of discussion about, okay, well, if we all like this, who's gonna put the hand in their pocket?
So thank you for that, because that's a good cue to actually try and bring it together. I'd love to talk about two things. All of you touched on, which I think everybody will understand, is emotion. You talked about whether the lobbyists are livid. You talked about the language of love when we were talking yesterday about this session. There is a reason why we're making all of these changes, because there's somebody either unhappy or somebody we're trying to make happy, whether it's capital owners, whether it's asset owners, whether it's citizens. Ultimately, we are trying to resolve something in the hope that something will happen and everybody will get behind. The reality is that rarely, if never, happens. There is never everyone everywhere is happy all the time. It's not realistic. So I want to talk a little bit about experience. Nearly 30 years ago, a fantastic academic called Joe Pine created this idea of the experience economy, which in my view is a fantastic model for really about how to design stimulus, because ultimately we are the owners of our experience. How people might be feeling in this room right now, I have no idea what we're making them feel. Hopefully not too bored, but probably a little bit, because this is not maybe the right way to have a conversation. I don't know. So I'm just going to talk.
It's just before lunch.
It's just before lunch as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the emotion, whether it's shaping a vision, whether it's introducing an intervention, whether it's doing whatever it is that you do. Do you actually sit down and think about how you want to make people feel? And what are the 2-3 things that you're trying to make people feel through your work, if that is a consideration? So I want to talk to you a little bit about experience and emotion, if it does play a role in the work that you do and in the places you're trying to impact. I don't know if it's too big or small a question, but I'd love your thoughts anyway. So whoever wants to go first. Obviously, this is a very difficult group to manage.
Yeah? But this is an idea we came up with last night, so let's see if this resonates with the audience.
Sure.
But we started talking about this idea of the love language of place, right? So if, clearly, as we said, you're trying to build a better relationship with place. And we all have different love languages, right? So yes, I would say, to answer your question very directly, when designing a destination, when designing a visitor attraction, we very clearly had a process, which was, what do you see, do, feel? So emotion was there. But having said that, we all feel things in different ways. So you might be in a district or a city, like you, for instance, talked about Aarhus being the, what was it? It was the naughty brother. right?
Yeah, naughty little
We've been
brother.
working in Liverpool recently, where the communities we were working with said, like, we're a maverick city. And actually what we ended up doing, working with the Museum of Liverpool and community groups, was the community groups in that maverick spirit said, we want to do a 24-hour takeover of this public space outside the museum. So I think the idea of saying, you might have a love language that's very practical, and therefore you attract people who appreciate the fact that the streets are clean and things work. Or you might have a love language that's much more flamboyant, in which case the sense of celebration is great. So I think emotion is an important starting point.
I mean, I think it's also about understanding who your community is and talking to them and asking them. And we've just gone through a bit of a branding process for Eastern City. And we talked to a lot of people who work in the area. And, you know, we all had our different ideas about what we thought would come out of this. But what was I think, quite surprising is that the level of pride that came out through the discussions with everyone that works in the Eastern City. And they said, I feel really proud to be part of this tribe. They talked about it being like a family, like a sort of movement.
Yeah.
And this idea that it had been innovating so much innovation and ideas and commerce, you know, and a very exciting place to be. And obviously you talk a lot about the history of the city, 2,000 years of history, but for us this was a way of actually really bringing that right up to date. So saying these are the people that are going to be making the history of the future, you know, the people in this space, they're the innovators. And I find that really inspiring, because that sort of speaks to the heart of what the identity of the city has historically been, but actually it's very future focused. And I think it's something you can then see how people get on board with something. I loved that idea of sort of, you know, familyness and tribe, you know, and really powerful when you then think about building experiences.
Are you feeling emotional, Stephen?
I am. I'm talking to your back. No, actually, I've lost my thought now. The point was that if you try to encourage change or develop new ideas, Maria said something very interesting yesterday. You've got to expect trouble. You have to be prepared for it, especially if you're a civil servant and you're trying to make changes. And the car lobbyists in the infrastructure, you know, they're quite loud. And this whole social media storm, you know, the Facebook or Instagram or whatever, the newspapers and things, it does create an opinion, which is not necessarily, they're often quite verbose in terms of negative. It's very rare that you get this kind of, oh, this is a fantastic idea. People just don't, the silent majority are not coming through. And so this is one of the biggest challenges, you know, in terms of being happy. So you have to be quite thick-skinned in some ways when you're trying to make these changes for the better, in my viewpoint. But this whole idea of nudging, making these suggestions and moving forward maybe incrementally is possibly a way forward.
Yeah.
But I do like the glorious fuck-up as well. I mean, if you make a mistake, make a really good one.
Make it a really
learn
good one.
from that. And then, you know, because if you do make a mistake, it's okay. It's a part of it. And I think the whole idea of making temporary interventions or prototyping is that you can make mistakes. And the politicians are quite risk assertive, right? They don't want to make mistakes. So making a big investment to find it doesn't work, let's make some tests and see how it works. And then if it's popular and we get a good vibe and discussion, it brings us to a next level.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and wrap it up now in the last 5 minutes by inviting one final thought. We talked about money, and yes, money is really important, but often it's not enough. And I would argue that place breaking is actually going around as place making when there's a lot of money. So there is a certain value of being resource constrained. I come from my current home, Singapore, which has a whole mindset, a national mindset, I would argue, around constraints, which produces a great deal of innovation and creativity. And there are places like Bilbao. I'd call Bilbao a master of reinvention. How do you do more with less? So I wonder if you can reflect a little bit, since we don't have too much time. I would love for you to talk about the value of time. How do you go slow, do you go fast in your projects, in your context, and in general, if you had any words of wisdom, that how do you tackle things beyond money? what are the resources that you'd like to deploy? And time is one of them that I'd like you to reflect on. But if there are any others, how do you actually make things happen, do more with less? I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I do know Rosanna has a nice little story about time on her left wrist.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah, good point. I mean, it's an interesting one because time is often the dimension that's left out in place, right? Because we're thinking about very tangible, fixed things. It's the thing that architects don't deal well with time very often. But actually, many other people do. You know, musicians, as I said, make fantastic placemakers because they know how to roll with that. They know how to improvise. A lot of the work we're doing now is related to the future of places and actually, collaborative, future of places. But I think when we're thinking about time, the challenge that we often have is that we might be talking 20, 30 years for a real transformation to happen, but you've got 20 minutes with someone. So actually, the thing we found actually the most successful is just take them to the place and feel it and experience it. If you get somebody to almost, I know you're a big fan of this, meditate in a place, like literally think about what you're feeling for 5 minutes, and then jump into your what-if future, in half an hour, you can build a new world because it's vivid. And I think that's to me like a key starting point.
A minute each.
I think I mentioned earlier the huge development pipeline in the Eastern City. I think what we've still got to remember, though, is that there is a here and now, and there are many tens of thousands of people coming to that place to work every day. And so, talking about time, there is this issue about meanwhile, which is a word we use quite a lot. And indeed. There are many spaces at ground floor that are either being hoarded up or are already empty. And what we're doing through bringing our property developers together, who've got a big appetite for this, and our local authority and our occupiers, is we're rolling out a programme of meanwhile use, bringing creative industries into the city, testing new concepts, which then the property developers are finding incredibly useful and are then embedding in their final schemes. And it is, for the here and now, it is enhancing the experience of being in the Eastern City.
Thank you. Stephen, any?
This thing about time, the politicians are elected for 4 years in Aarhus. And this does have an impact on decision making. There's a big push to get much more citizen engagement in everything in the choices. And that takes time.
Yeah.
So the politicians, if they've just been elected, they would like to see something happen quite quickly. Because they want to be elected again later and so on. But the point is, if you want to have proper citizen engagement, you have to make the space to it so it happens. And if you need to speed things up, I think it's actually making things tangible, rather than visualizations and pictures of things. You actually see it in the flesh, and get out there talking to people in the different locations. Yesterday, Maria was talking about where the kids are, where the different age groups are. You're not in the town hall. You have to be out there and make events and things to happen. Like you're saying, to get these people to meet together and talk. So we have to be creative about ways of approaching people and building this whole thing about trust.
Yes.
So the politicians feel confident and the citizens feel that they're heard.
I think trust
and as a civil servant or a change agent, as I like to see myself, is you have to be in that piggy in the middle, mixing and joining things together.
Yeah.
You're talking about, Charles was talking about the complexity and the spaghetti and the whole thing of trying to bring people to clean up, try to arrange and organize things. These become magicians.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing it to trust, which is the real currency we all need in the world today. So that's a great way to end, and it takes time to get to timeless. So I want to just end with a moment of gratitude to all these wonderful young people who are forced to sit here, I suspect, but are paying dear attention. So thank you to the future, thank you to the present, and thank you to Bilbao, who is certainly, the people of Bilbao have created something that is very timeless. So I'm very grateful that you have given us the opportunity to be in your hometown, and we hope to keep coming back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anupam.
All right.
Are we dancing off?
We're dancing off.